Everybody, this is Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. This is the Podman Community Meeting. If you have not done so, please sign in on the meeting notes. And as we go along today, I'll be taking notes, but if you see that I'm doing something incorrectly, especially spelling your name or anything like that, please go ahead and add to it or correct that. And I love getting notes from other people. That's happened a couple of times in the past, so please go ahead and add your notes as we go along. The Podman Community Meeting, is mostly to talk about demonstrations and make announcements. We have a Cabal meeting, which is used more along the lines of doing design discussion kind of things. This particular meeting is on the first Tuesday of each month. We may move the time to be a little friendlier for the folks in India, China, and Australia. We'll probably do that sometime in the spring. We'll try and do that at least once a year. Topics are driven from prior meetings or requests to me. So you can send me an email, tomsweeney@redhat.com, or you can add them to the meeting notes as we go along today. Discussions don't have to be about Podman itself, but any of the container tool technologies such as Build, Scopio, and related container projects. And there's the HackMD link if you want to go ahead and use it. I'll briefly go through the agenda. Today we're going to be hearing about DIY networking and rootless containers from Paul. We've kind of crimped that down a little bit. So I know Rudolph had asked for a little bit more in depth, and we may add that as another topic at a later community meeting if we don't get in depth enough today. And then Aditya will be talking about volume demos. Dan will be talking about Podman Security Bench. Ashley will be talking about Podman on M1 Mac and its current status. And then Matt will follow that up with Podman 3.4 announcements. And John will be talking about supporting format tables in the PS output from the REST API. And Nolan will be talking about a Podman build platform list, which is very handy. Oh, sorry, somebody's pinging me on IRC. And open forum questions following that. Topics for the next meeting, we'll talk about that, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand this over to Paul. Paul, DIY networking?
Okay, yeah. All right. Let me share my screen. You don't see anything, right?
Nope, we're not seeing anything at the moment. Just you. And your lovely ficus tree behind you.
Why is it not working this time?
Because I didn't have us go through and test it before the meeting started.
Yes, that's the reason. Always if you don't test it. Maybe we skip and I try getting it to work. I think I have to restart.
Go ahead and try Atvia for the volume demos.
Sure. I'll try sharing my screen. Just a second. Okay. Not allowing me to select any screens. Just a second.
Adi, I can barely hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Yeah. I'm just trying to share my screen, but the pop-up is not allowing me to select any window or entire screen itself. Just a second. Okay. Just a second. Let me. Okay, I think I got it.
Yeah, if you click on the terminal screen in BlueJeans, it should show you which screens to pick from. It's usually, whatever terminal. I'm not sure that it has the capability to share just a particular screen or just a particular window on your screen.
This is really weird. Paul, what was happening when you were trying to share? It's not allowing me to click the allow button. Okay. Let me try reconnecting. Just a second.
Okay. Well, let's try for strike 3 on us. Dan, do you want to give us a try? Podman Security Bench. And we lost Dan. Dan, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you try sharing and going on with your part of the talk?
Yep, hold on. Can you see my screen?
It's coming up. And it's very black at the moment.
Oh boy. You see the mouse?
I see nothing other than one pixel that's lit up and everything else is black.
It looks like the typical Wayland problem.
Okay. Well, how about the fourth time's the charm? Ashley, are you talking or are you sharing today?
I guess I can mostly talk about it, but I'll try sharing.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Try for the share and go for the talk if it doesn't work.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to give a quick update on the status of Podman on the M1. So recently, QEMU has been patched upstream, which includes all the M1 patches. So QEMU works on an M1 Mac. It hasn't been released upstream, but we were able to get the patches into Homebrew. So that means if you install Homebrew, or if you install QEMU using Homebrew, then you can use Podman correctly. And so if you get Podman from Homebrew, it means that it will automatically install the Homebrew version of QEMU, which means that Podman on M1s work. And hopefully you can see that I have Podman installed via brew. And then if I just do a Podman machine start, it should come up correctly. It takes a second, but yeah, everything that works on the Intel Mac should work on the M1. And then you can do it. So everything works correctly. Vanilla install, brew install Podman, and then everything just kind of works now, which is great. That's it for me.
To break the odd silence. Ashley, what's the next step?
So like mounting and like volumes and stuff is probably what we're working on for Podman in general, like on Macs and Podman Machine. Other than that, yeah, mostly trying to get that support in.
Awesome. So with volumes, or once volumes are done, are there other work items left to do?
Probably. I don't remember right now, but there's. Oh, okay. So we're also trying to get a GUI, and we're kind of discussing on what's going on there, like kind of a menu bar. That's what they would call it on a Mac, or like on Windows, it would be called a systray, to manage the VMs, the Podman machine.
Very cool work. Thanks, Ashley.
Okay, can folks hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Gotta love it. Sound died on me halfway through Ashley's talk there. Okay.
Does my screen share work?
Yes.
It does.
So go ahead, Paul.
All right, perfect. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about rootless networking. As Tom said, not so much about the do-it-yourself part, because I think it's more important to say what we can do at the moment before someone starts doing their own stuff, which is more complicated. So when we talk about rootless networking, we do not need extra privileges. So that means that we cannot modify the host networking namespace, and we need some form of user space application to proxy the network connections from and into the container.
Paul, all I see is the Podman community meeting agenda. Are you sharing something actually interesting?
I'm sharing something actually interesting.
Then I am not seeing it.
Yeah, same here. I'm seeing the Podman community meeting agenda. That's it. Okay.
Do you see now?
Seeing
Does it
rootless
swap?
networking slides.
I see slides.
You see if I swap through them?
I'm sorry, didn't hear you.
Do you see the slip for NetNS slide?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
All right. So this proxy, which we are using to proxy the connection from the host network namespace into the container, this application is called slip for NetNS. It's user mode networking for unprivileged network namespaces. And this works by using the slip network stack, and it connects this to a tab interface in the container network namespace. And this is used to provide internet connectivity for the container. Slip for NetNS also supports port forwarding. So in the small graphic you see we have the host namespace, and each container gets their own slip for NetNS process, which proxies all the connections. So we have a couple of settings for slip for NetNS, and by default, this network mode is used for rootless users. And if you need to connect to the loopback IP on the host, you can set the setting allow host loopback to true. This allows the container to connect to the IP 10.0.2.2, and you can connect directly to ports which are only accessible on the loopback adapter on the host. So this is also a security problem, so that's why it's off by default. But if you need this, if you need the access, you can turn it on. Then you can also turn on IPv6 support. That's not enabled by default, but we want to change that for Podman 4.0. So because IPv6 is not fully tested yet, but it should work. And the most important one is the port handler. Most users are surprised that if you forward ports, then the application inside the container always sees an internal IP for the container as source IP. So if you have like an Nginx running or Apache web server and you look in the logs, you see the source IP recorded, but it's usually then like a 10.0.2.100, I believe, because the rootless port forwarder rewrites this. And if you need this, you should change this to port handler slip for NetNS. The problem with the slip for NetNS port handler is it's much slower. So that's why we have rootless kit by default. But if you want the actual IP addresses, then you need the slip for NetNS one. you can find more options in the Podman run and Podman create man pages if you look under the network flag. So then we have the rootless CNI networking. This was added in Podman 2.1, I believe, the initial support, but it used an extra container and it couldn't do much. So I reworked this for Podman 3.2. So now we have full rootless CNI networking support. And this means that this uses an extra namespace to execute CNI plugins as a rootless user. So this mainly only works for bridges. There is MacVLAN works in theory, but you can only use interfaces that are in the rootless CNI network namespace and that are not your host interfaces, so you don't have the expected result. So it doesn't really make sense to use MacVLAN, but in theory you could. The main advantage of this is that we have inter-container communication that you can use out of the box. So each container has their IP address like with root containers, and they can talk to each other. So we still need Glib for NetNS because we still need some proxy to make the rootless namespace connect to the host namespace. So if you want to use rootless CNI networking, you can, similar to root, you can just create a network with Podman network create, and then you just run Podman run -- network and give the network name. So the IP addresses which are assigned to the container, they are not reachable from the host network namespace because we don't have privileges. So it's only in the rootless CNI network namespace. And if you want to connect from a host namespace, you need port forwarding. But if you only need to connect to the IP once, I have here an example with Podman unshare -- rootless CNI. You can join this namespace and then you can connect with curl to the IP, for example. So then a small part about do it yourself. So if you need a more advanced setup, you can always do your own namespace setup. So to do this, you mostly want to create interfaces on the host, and this would require root privileges. So that's something Podman can never do and will not do as rootless users. But if you want your own, you should start a container or create a container with with the network mode none. So this just creates an empty network namespace without anything in it. So if you have your container created, you can use Podman container init to initialize the mounts and the namespace and all the other stuff that is needed for the container. And if you have done this, you can inspect the container for the PID to get the main process PID. And with the process PID, you can move interfaces into this namespace via IP link set, interface name, and then NetNS PID. So this would allow you to move a web pair or some other interface into this namespace, like a MacVLAN interface, which you have created manually. Problem with such a setup is that you need to do this every time the container starts, every time the namespace is created again. And you also need to clean up your interfaces in case you have some bridges or something created. So that's Podman cannot do this. And yeah, the Rudolf Resley had an example which you can find on the mailing list, which uses such a setup. I think it's definitely possible if you need to do this, but I would prefer to use the rootless CNI networking in most cases. Okay, and that's from my side. If you have any questions, please ask them now because I have to leave a bit early.
Okay, any questions for Paul?
Yeah, if I can ask a question. Hi, this is Erdo Vesely speaking, and Paul, thank you very much for your presentation. The initial email that I sent and that I'm assuming you linked, have you reviewed my instructions? Because basically the main question is whether what I put into the email is the correct instructions, or whether it's something that I just figured out by myself and it's not really correct.
So it's definitely correct. So I have not tried it, but I assumed it works for you. So
Yes.
So my main point, which you use Podman run, I believe, instead of like create and init. So the advantage of in create and init is that the process is not started yet. So you can first add all the interfaces before you actually started the process. So with your example, your container starts without an interface and you only add it later, which can be a problem for some applications. But
Excellent,
other
thank you.
than that, I think it's
I'm
pretty useful.
I'm thinking that if that's possible, I'm not sure, Tom, whether I or anybody else can edit documentation on Podman, but I was thinking to put that into the wiki, Podman wiki or documentation, and Paul or anybody else can, let's say, refresh the instructions in case something happens in future and the instructions change.
Yeah, can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. The way to do that would be to write a tutorial on what you're trying to do, and we can put that and then it can become a living document.
Yeah, pretty much the email is the tutorial, but I can revisit it and send it to you.
Open as a pull request, add a tutorial. Paul, I just wanted to point out that a lot of those settings that you were showing on the command line can also be set in containers.conf. So if you want to permanently change to use slurp.fs, that can be done containers.conf.
Yes.
Correct.
By the way, if you have time, I can give you a brief introduction why actually I was thinking about the other way, not using slip for net, but basically sticking virtual Ethernet into that. If you are interested, because there is a use case, very real use case.
I have to drop now, but we can maybe discuss this offline somewhere.
Yeah, Rudolph, you have my email, right?
Yes.
Okay, so ping me a mail and I'll hook you up with Paul.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
It'd be nice to have a demo next month at this also. So if you want to sign up to do a demo of what you're trying to build.
And now you're trying to do my job, Dan.
I'm sorry, was it for me or for Paul at the demo?
I think Dan is suggesting demos from anybody that's willing to do so. If you would be willing to do so, we'd be happy to take one, Rudolph.
I'm willing to do so if the meeting is in the same time. If it's much later, then it would be too late for me. I'm in London time.
Yep. Yeah, it's November 5th, I think. November 2nd is the day, same time.
Okay,
we don't
perfect.
have daylight savings by then.
Yeah, I can make a demo.
Okay, we'll talk later about that. Right.
Cheers.
Now, who is sharing right now?
You see a terminal right now?
Yes, we are. So why don't we go ahead with you, Dan, since we have you online.
Okay. Okay. So for those that don't know, there's I've added a new tool to GitHub containers called Podman Security Bench. Basically, what Podman Security Bench is based on Docker Security Bench, which was based on the CIS analysis of the security around Docker. We've been asked, basically, the Podman project over time has been asked to somehow provide security tools to sort of judge how your container environment is running. So over the last couple of weeks, I took to taking the Docker Security Bench and converting it to work with Podman. And so I added this new package. I'm just going to do a quick demonstration of it. Right now, you have to run it as root because that's the way the Docker one did, and I haven't gone through to make it work with rootless. Basically, it's just Podman Security Bench, and when you run it, I'll put it through less right now. It runs a whole bunch of security checks. Just actually, let me not running through less. Destroys the output. And it runs a whole bunch of security checks that you can see from up here. It was based on Dr. Rink's security bench, and that was based on top of CIS Docker benchmark for 1.3.1. Most of the checks work the same way. I had to change some paths. So this first section, basically it's going through and it's looking for whether or not you set it up auditing on your environment. Most users don't set up auditing, but auditing would allow you to know if someone changed permissions or changed some of the content inside of the subdirectories. So the original CIS bench looked for turning on auditing. It also goes through and checks your containers to make sure they're running with SE Linux enabled. They have the default seccomp filters turned on. Checks like that. When it's done, a lot of these are sort of advisory and look for other types of problems in it. And when you're done, you get a security score. And this one says I have a -1. I forget why, but it wants all my containers running and with no new privs. So if I have any containers in the system that I don't run with no new privs, it gives me a -1 for it. So it gives you somewhat of a idea of what kind of security you have in your environment. You can go in and look at each one of these individual checks that are going on in the system. And then, so I did the original port for this in Pod, as a GitHub. What I'd like to see if people want to contribute, I'll stop sharing now, would be to get it to run rootless mode. I'd also like to get it right now, it doesn't really delve into like editing containers.conf and looking how potential things are set inside of there. But if we want to expand it and we can get the open source community behind it, we could expand out this into some better checks. So if you're interested in security and analyzing Podman, then Podman Security Bench is a new tool that we have available for people to contribute with. That's it.
Good. Thank you. Any questions for Dan before we move on? All right, Antia, shall we try again with you?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me properly?
Yep.
Okay, so let me try sharing my screen. Okay, I'm sharing my entire window. Can you guys see my screen now?
Oh, we're seeing a black screen.
Okay.
And it says you are sharing screen. I think we have success.
Okay, just a second. Let me share the correct window. I think it shared my browser's window. Can you guys see my terminal now?
Looks like it's getting there. We see a mouse pointer. That's it.
Can you guys see my terminal?
No.
Oh, we just see the mouse.
Just see the mouse.
Okay, something is glitched. Just let me try.
If you share an application instead of sharing your entire screen, it works better.
It doesn't really shows any application. It is. I'm using Chromium first time because like my Firefox was not working.
Yeah, I switched to Firefox and got it to work. So.
Oh, okay. And I switched to Chromium because. Okay, so I cannot see my terminal here. Just a second.
Okay, Atia, I hate to do this, but we've missed up so much time. I think we're going to just not do this demo this time, and we'll save it for the next time.
Sure.
Thank you for putting it together. Okay, Matt, you want to talk about Podman 3.4?
All right, let's see. I'm going to try and share my screen. All right, can everyone see a release notes page?
Yes, we can.
Yes. All right, so I'll be discussing the new 3.4.0 release that came out late last week, but I'll start off with a preface on future development of Podman. So with 3.4.0 out, we are switching our focus over to Podman 4.0, which is going to be a big release with a few breaking changes, mostly related to networking. 4.0 is going to take us a while. We're expecting it will be released in January-ish, and there will be no major Podman releases between now and then. We will keep doing bug fix releases for 3.4.0 to fix any major issues that pop up, but don't expect a 3.5.0. We're going straight to 4.0, and it will take us a while to get there. Now, on to the features of 3.4.0. We've got some exciting stuff here around Podman PlayCube and Podman GenerateCube, mostly thanks to Brent. We have support for init containers here, which is a big ask we've had for a while, where you now have the ability to create init containers which run before a pod. And there are two types. There are always and once init containers. A once init container only runs one time, whereas an always init container will run every time you restart the pod. And you can use these for things like doing an initial import into your database container or similar things, setting up volumes that you're going to use with the rest of the pod. So these are pretty cool, and they also integrate natively with Podman PlayCube and Podman GenerateCube. Podman, or Cube rather, has always had the notion of init containers, and because of this, we can now handle these natively in Podman. Secondly, we have the ability to build images with Podman PlayCube. There are a few circumstances in which the build happens, refer to the documentation for that. But basically, this makes Podman PlayCube act a bit more like Docker Compose. We've noticed people who want to use it as a Docker Compose replacement, not just a way of interacting with Cube clusters. So we're starting to build in features that allow it to act more like what Compose does. And this right here allows you to not just pull an image from a registry, but if you have a Docker file locally, you can build that into an image and use it with your PlayCube commands. Finally, we have a teardown option for PlayCube, which is allowing you to take any YAML that you have created a pod from and get rid of that pod instantly with one option. So you provide the YAML, you provide the new flag, -teardown, and we will get rid of whatever pod or pods were created by it.
Yeah,
and again, this
Matt, that's a typo. It's --down, not teardown.
--down. Okay. Gonna have to fix this afterwards. Okay, it's --down, not --teardown. Otherwise, we have a few new commands. We have Podman pod logs, shows the logs for every container in a pod at the same time. We have Podman volume export and Podman volume import. You can now export the contents of volumes and import those contents back into other volumes. We have improvements to Podman auto update. It can now roll back. So basically, if you do an automatic update and the container fails to start, then we will revert back to the previous version of the image because we assume that the new image caused a problem. Various small fixes, Podman image SCP command. I believe that was demoed last time, but briefly that allows you to move images between different systems using SCP. And we have a few changes. Most notably, we have aliased Podman build to Podman buildx for improved Docker compat. And we have deprecated the --mac VLAN flag to Podman network create. We recommend you use --driver Mac VLAN instead. So that's just a syntax change. We're still supporting Mac VLAN. Otherwise, we have 60 different bug fixes, which is a healthy number. And yeah, that is about it. Any questions, or otherwise, I will turn it back over.
Yeah, I would just say that there's a lot of fixes in Podman 3.4 for Mac OS. So a lot of things that were people found when they first went to Podman on a Mac have been fixed in 3.4. So
it's worth noting that not all of those are available right now. So the architecture of Podman for Mac uses a Fedora CoreOS VM. We need 3.4 to land in that VM, which means it has to go through a little process to become officially stable and then get added to the Fedora CoreOS image. But we're expecting that within the next 2 weeks or so, it should be updated, and then you will have all the fixes on OS X. Some of them were client-side, and you'll hit those today, but I feel like most of them were actually server-side. So 2 weeks or so, and you will have those. Okay, that's about
thanks,
it.
Matt.
Let me turn over.
All right, John, talking about supporting format tables and PS output.
I'll make this quick. So we use the Golang tab writer and formatter for all of our commands. We have this added format function called table. The idea here is that you get a nice table output, and it has this wonderful header at the top. If I give just ID, notice there's no header. And we can actually say, well, I want table, and I want no heading, and that works too. So you get the expected output. This one was a little tricky for us because we use some embedded structures to do the reporting. So it hadn't always worked as expected. Pretty much anywhere you use format, you should be able to use table these days and get the expected output. We run that through a package in Containers Common to make that work. Any questions?
You didn't show it, but you could do multiple columns there too, right? You could do like ID, name, creation date, whatever.
Yes, I just kept it simple for the demo.
Okay.
Any?
Sounds good.
Yeah, if you, I can.
Okay, any questions? Any further questions for John? Right.
All set.
And we will have Nolan talk about build platform list.
Okay, just a second, let me start my screen sharing. All right, you should be able to see my terminal window right now. So what I'm demonstrating here is the ability for Podman build to take multiple values for its -- platform flag. Those of you who've been using Podman for a while have noticed that in the last year or so, we've added the ability to have it build for architectures which are not the same as the one that you're running build itself on. Sorry, Podman. Right, this is the Podman meeting. So what I'm using here is Podman version 3.4 running on Fedora 35. This machine does have QEMU user static, which will allow me to run commands, which will allow run instructions to actually be executed correctly, even if they're for the different architectures. I'm going to go ahead and add an arch to the end of this one to punctuate this one. I'm also going to be using the -- manifest command. We're going to use the -- manifest command, which was added earlier this year, so that we could tell Podman to go ahead and create a manifest list and add the just built image to that manifest list. Previously, the expected workflow is you would run Podman build multiple times with multiple targets. In the first invocation would create the manifest list, and each subsequent one would add your newly built image to it. We had to do some cleanups on internal libraries in order to get this to work correctly inside of a single run, and so that they could be done without having to make sure they were running at different times. But let's see, UBI8 plus ping, let's call it that. The name of the repository is actually going to be one that I've already said, it's UBI8 plus ping. I always forget whether it's with or plus. So I'm going to run this. Oh, right. Where did I? Yep, that was supposed to be a comma here.
Demo gods are strong with us today.
What am I missing here?
It should be platform, not target.
That's exactly right. Target is used to define which stage of my build I stop at. That's why I didn't have any of this in my history earlier. Okay, this is going to run reasonably quick because my base images have already been pulled and the first two steps that I already had in the Docker file were already built earlier. So really, we're just running the arch step new for each of these cache builds. As you can see, when I'm running multiple platforms, we're going to go ahead and preface the step with the architecture it's on, because otherwise it's really hard to tell what's going on, especially when you start running the -- jobs flag to do these things in parallel. So as you can see, my build's already finished. Podman images should be listing my brand new manifest list. Podman manifest inspect. That one, and my font size is a little too big, but you can see there's 4 in here. Let me go ahead and push that. This is going to take a little while. So in the meantime, do we have any questions about this? Ooh, that's going to take a while. In the meantime, are there any questions? I can't Windows if anyone's raising anything or typing text. But if we don't want to stay on this while it's pushing, we can go ahead, and anyone who wants to go poke at this repository in a little bit, we'll see that the image will show up there before too long. Any questions? Did I get quietly dropped from the meeting?
Nope,
Nope, you're
good.
still here.
Okay.
Looks good. Not the most expedient thing, but it's looking good. It's getting there.
Look, my uplink is not that fast, man. It's internet in America.
Okay. You need to get yourself some FiOS, Nolan.
They don't run to my home, sadly.
Oh, that's too bad.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I will feel free. I'll happily pipe up when this finishes later on if we're still online.
Okay, sounds good to me. And that is all that we had other than open forum questions. So are there any questions over anything that we've done so far, or any questions in general that you'd like to talk about? And also if there are any topics for the next time. Very quiet. Dan, did you have anything that you wanted to chat about today?
I get nothing to add at this point.
Maybe
Alrighty,
Aditya would like to try his demo, 3rd time's the charm.
Or
How
do
do
you
you
guys want me to switch to Firefox? I can just give one last shot. Just
One last shot, yeah.
Yeah. Just let me switch my browser. Just a second.
So Andrews asked a question about, somebody asked a question about running Podman machine with a different architecture than the native one. Ashley, is that supported right now? Can you specify in a Podman machine a different architecture?
No.
I'm not sure.
No, you can't. Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
There's definitely an issue about it. I seem to recall someone opening a pull request, but it might not have been merged yet. But once you have the machine, you can install the QEMU user static. I think you'd need to RPM overlay the thing into FCOS, but if you got it, it would let you do it. Oh, Adi, it's working.
Yeah. Okay. I think Firefox needed a restart. So cool. I guess it works finally. Okay. So yeah, this is a feature. Currently I'm going to be talking about two new features which we recently added to Podman. The first one is adding an overlay on top of external rootfs. So this feature actually came out from a GitHub issue where user was trying to create an overlay on top of exploded rootfs. So I'm just going to demo it. So just exporting an Alpine from Podman. So this Alpine is straight out of Docker.io, and you can just follow the similar steps to replicate this. I'm just creating a new dir for the rootfs. I'm just going to explode the tar here. But see rootfs. Okay, so I have extracted the rootfs in this directory. I'm just going to create a temporary file here just to check if we are actually working on an overlay or actual root file system. So the file here says hello and some random text. I'm just going to close this file. I'm going out of the rootfs again. And let's try to run Podman with this rootfs directly instead of any external image. So rootfs, and since we want overlay, so this is the feature which I'm talking about is actually this colon capital O. So it should create an overlay on top of this root file system, and everything should be on an overlaid upper layer instead of the actual rootfs directory. So yeah, so we are on the rootfs, and let me check if it's the same one. Yeah, we created this random file just before this step. So I'm just going to create a new file here, and we're going to check if that is actually going to propagate into the actual root file system. So ideally it shouldn't, but we can confirm. I'm just going outside the container just to check if we are not violating, if we are doing the actual work on an overlay. So rootfs. Yeah, so sample is not here. However, the sample was created inside the container. So this is a feature which I was specifically going to demo. And we have a second feature which is quite similar to this one, but that is only for the volumes. So we also added a new option in volumes, which should allow users to create overlay on top of Podman's native named volume. So let's try that as well. So I'm just going to create a new volume. My bad. Create test. So I'm just creating a new volume called test, and we're going to inspect this volume to get the mount point. My bad. It should start with this, I guess. No, we can just inspect. Yeah. So I got the mount point. I'm just opening this mount point into my host just to check if something is there. We are again going to do the same thing. I'm just creating a new file in this volume, and we have to check if we are actually working on the overlay of this volume and not the actual volume. So I'm just going to run a new container, which is Alpine from the upstream image, and I'm just going to mount the volume. So we have this mount flag test is the named volume. We're going to mount this into data, and let's create an overlay on top of it. Yeah, so we should have a data folder, and it should contain the file which is coming from the host directly, which is hello. So let's check that. We are inside the container. I'm just trying to, yeah, we have this file. Now we are going to create another file here, and we need to check if that file should not persist on the host, since this is an overlay. I'm just going to create a new file here. Vi sample, just write something here. WQ save. Yeah, the sample and hello are on the container, but that shouldn't propagate to our actual volume mount. Yeah, and it's not there. So these are the two new features which were added recently. Most of the practical applications around these two revolves that if you're spinning ephemeral environments, either on top of rootfs, which is not coming from a Docker or OCI image, or if you want to use volumes, and volumes is also being used by ephemeral containers, and you don't want to persist the operations which you're doing in those ephemeral containers. So these two commands can be used directly. And this was the most of the demo which I was trying to present, and my browser was glitching. So yeah.
A couple of comments about these overlay volumes is they're really temporary volumes. You're allowed to the content will last as long as the container lasts. When the container exits, the data will be lost. Similarly, you can't commit the data. So an overlay is sort of like a bind mount with the tempfs on top of it. So the tempfs overlay on top. So that's how that works.
Yeah, the original issue on the GitHub actually mentioned that someone actually wanted a read-only mount with write capability on top of it. So that simulates something like that. So it's the use case is mostly what I think of is mostly for the jobs and ephemeral environments which you spin up temporarily for testing and stuff, but you don't want to commit anything on the disk or the actual. Yeah.
Yep. For anybody that's never seen overlay volumes, they also work on top of bind mount volumes. So you can just pick a random directory on the system and volume mount it in and then put an overlay on top of it. The container can write all it wants to the directory, but when the container exits, there'll be nothing written to the host.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just going to stop my screen share. And if someone has any questions, we can just answer it here.
No questions, but I got to commend you on your persistence, Atya, for sticking to it and getting that demo done. No pressure at all there. Very nicely done. Oh, and of course, I get phone calls just as trying to talk. So, given that, I don't think we have any other questions. I'll throw it up for just one last chance for questions for today, or any topics for the next meeting. I'm not hearing anything, so I'm just going to say once again that our next meeting is Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021 at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, which will still be UTC -4. We don't hit daylight savings time in the US until the weekend after that date. And then our next Cabal meeting, yes, Tim?
It was a question by Xian in the chat.
Oh, okay. I did not see that.
I'm saying no right now, but this just to answer the question, but I think one of the chief concerns I have
could you just say what the question is, please?
Oh, will there be any plans for ARM on Intel on ARM for Podman machine? So that was similar to the earlier question. And as of today, no. I'm hesitant to do something in the future only because there's a number of things that need to be altered. It's just programming, but I'm also worried about the result, and I'm worried about the straightening out all the acceleration level stuff for a different architecture and that kind of thing. Maybe there's a reason to do it that's stronger use case, like is that I'm maybe not seeing. And if that's the case, I'd love to hear it, and that may motivate us to do so or take a contribution.
Can't use run in multi-platform builds without it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll jot it down for sure, and maybe we'll do an assessment on it, what it would really take. Is this something that Docker does by any chance? Does anyone know?
No idea.
I know there's a feature in Lima to do it right now, so it should work with Podman and Fedora as well, even though it runs Ubuntu and Containerd out of the box.
If I ask folks what's more important, something for volumes or this, which would you rank?
Volumes.
Yeah,
and
volumes.
Then between volumes and GUI?
GUI. Go volumes first, GUI second.
And then this cross-platform stuff last.
I would leave this to community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll just say that if someone does this, I think we will definitely merge it. It's just that we don't feel like we can take the time to do it ourselves.
Yeah, I can probably document how you do it, even if it's just a link to the upstream. If you want to run Fedora VM instead of the regular Podman machine integrated CoreOS VM, I see it as slightly different use cases.
Anyone have any idea what that Intel Mac is going to run an ARM Linux distribution, how that's going to go? Is it the performance going to really stink?
I have only tried it on Linux, and then there it works. So.
Okay.
I thought the question was to
mean,
a VM that matched
KVM.
the architecture of the host.
Oh, this is a VM that doesn't match the architecture of
Right.
those.
It's the flip.
So at least a 10x slowdown, but probably worse for some use cases is to be expected.
So you guys are going to write. You guys aren't going to write bugs that on my M
Performance
on
sucks.
my Intel when I run it on ARM it stinks and Podman's the worst ever.
There were some use cases that would crash the QEMU cross architecture, like trying to compile a Go program without using the cross compiler and so on. So therefore, the VM could be like a fallback or workaround in those cases. But normally, you want to let QEMU use the space to do the architecture translation if you can get away with it.
Fair enough.
Okay.
So another question, last question on here. OpenZFS started working on a user mount namespace support for LXC. Would be interested in. We're interested in any pull requests from users to, as long as they're willing to continue to support it over time, then we'd look at any pull request.
Right, given that we're running out of time for this meeting, and just real quickly, the Cabal meeting is also coming up October 21st at 10 a.m., an hour earlier than this meeting, and that's still UTC -4. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, especially for hanging out with the technical problems that we had at the start of this meeting, and we'll see you in next month or later this month for the call. Thanks all.